Well, hello once again, everyone, wherever you happen to be in the world. I appreciate you being here. You are listening to or watching or both Unstoppable Mindset. Our guest today, Teresa Hill-Putnam, used to own a pretty good sized performing arts school, but today she's a performing arts coach and she does other things as well. And I'm going to let her tell you more about it because it's no fun if I give everything away. Then what is there to talk about? So,
True
Teresa,
that.
you like that, huh?
Yeah, great.
So, Teresa, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're here.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Well, why don't we start, as I love to do all the time? Why don't you tell us kind of about the early Teresa growing up and all that?
Well, I started dancing when I was about 2.5, 3 years old and grew up as a dancer. And I was actually very, very shy as a child. And that's why my parents put me into dance classes. I would hide behind my mom and so put me into the performing arts, and that helped me gain some confidence. And I was a good student. And just loved the performing arts. I started my first business teaching the neighborhood students when I was 14, and all of my cousins and stuff. So much enjoyed that, and that grew into my next love, which is owning a studio,
Mm.
which I did for 35 years in Colorado.
Now, what did your mom do? Was she a dancer? Did she do any of that?
My mom grew up dancing. She wasn't really a dancer. She was a dance student growing up.
Mm.
My mom is an artist. My dad is a drummer. And, I kind of just grew up in the arts world and, loved it from before I could even remember. So,
So your dad is a drummer. He
yeah.
plays professionally?
He did up until COVID, and then things kind of shut everything down, and he hasn't really picked it back up since then, unfortunately.
Well, that's too bad. We always need
Yeah,
talent in the world.
I
Co-
know, right?
Of course, now being a fan of old westerns like Gunsmoke, when you say he's a drummer, I'd say, what kind of whiskey did he sell? But that's a different story.
Yeah, a little bit different.
Yeah, couldn't resist though. But that's cool. Well, so you come by, although you were shy, you come by performing pretty honestly from parents who both did and do it or did it.
Correct.
So where did you grow up, in Denver or where?
I was kind of all over. My dad got transferred a lot, so I spent some time in Kansas, I spent some time in Oklahoma, Utah, even a little bit of time in Hawaii and Colorado. Just kind of all over. Most of my time, I guess, was spent at the University of Utah with the training with the School of Ballet West there.
So what work did your dad do when you were growing up that transferred you around, or that your mom did?
He was with the American Stores Company, Skaggs Drug, Skaggs Alpha
Ah,
Beta.
okay.
Yeah.
So
And they
yeah,
transferred him around a lot, so we went
but they
wherever Dad needed to be.
but they kept him, which meant he must be successful. He must have been successful.
Yeah, he was really great at it.
That's pretty cool. So you went to the University of Utah, and what degree did you get?
Actually, I was in the dance department.
Ah, that makes sense, of course. What a silly thing to ask. So you graduated. What did you do after you graduated?
Can just continued. I had my own school
You
already.
had your own school already, so
Yeah,
you started that while you were in college.
right.
So you had
Actually,
the
I started out late high school
okay. So
and then continued on.
you had the entrepreneurial spirit right from the outset.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's pretty cool. Well, so you had that school for 35 years,
hmm
and what made you decide not to do that anymore?
Well, when COVID hit, I have a disease called myasthenia gravis, and I've been on prednisone for 25 years. And
Mm.
so when COVID hit, I'm very high risk. And so I had to get out of the classroom. Couldn't be around the kids very much because of the germs, not just COVID, but the flu and
Yeah.
strep and everything else. And so I decided to continue the virtual direction. And my daughter was doing the in person. So I did all the online and she did the in person. We did that for a little while. And then my youngest child, who was 17 at the time, needed to come to Los Angeles in order to pursue her career, which is film, television, and music. And so I decided, obviously a 17-year-old's not coming to Los Angeles alone. So, and I was teaching virtually anyway. So we put everything we owned in storage, sold the house, and moved to Los Angeles to follow a dream.
Wow. And how's that going?
It's going great.
That's cool.
Yeah, we just got off of a 6-week music tour with her that we went on for the summer, and that was fun. And now we're back here, and she had a short film audition this morning, and she just keeps, between the film, television, and music, we're staying pretty busy.
All necessary things to have around in a good, fun world
Yes.
by any standard. Well, so when did you discover you had myasthenia gravis?
Well, in 1999, I started getting super sick. I went from being able to dance and, hold my leg above my head, and, I had all the strength and everything. And then within about a week, I couldn't even get out of bed. I just went downhill so quickly. I had no strength, was struggling to breathe, was struggling to eat, swallow. I couldn't lift my arms or my legs, couldn't walk, couldn't sit up. And then they did a lot of tests on me. Nothing was coming back positive. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. It took about 18 months to figure that out. And finally, 2001, they diagnosed me with myasthenia gravis.
Mm.
So
So what is that disease exactly? I've heard of it, but I don't know a lot about it.
most people don't know what it is actually. So I'm surprised you've even heard of it. It's quite rare. It's a neuromuscular disease. It's autoimmune. And basically my brain is telling my body what to do, but my muscles don't always respond. It's a disconnect between the nerve and the
Ah,
muscle. So I take medicine called Mestinon. I take it about every 4 hours. And what it does is it acts like a television antenna and it connects my muscles to my nerves and makes my muscles work.
it brings them back into line so they do what they're told, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
without it, my muscles don't work. And with it, my muscles work. So the drug itself was created as an antidote for nerve gas,
Mm.
interestingly. And it works great for myasthenia gravis. I'm still on prednisone, which will that helps with the autoimmune part of it.
Right.
But then the Mestinon helps with the symptoms. There's no cure. There's just treatments. And luckily for me, the treatments do work. I had my chest cut open in 2001 and had my thymus removed, which is a little tiny gland that's next to your heart. And so anyway, they took it out. It's supposed to be the size of a green pea. And they got mine out and it was bigger than the doctor's hand.
Wow.
And they they sent it away to do testing. They thought for sure it must be cancer because it was so big. Well, it wasn't. It was healthy, luckily. But getting rid of the thymus, my body was attacking itself, and that helped a lot. But like I said, there's no cure. There's just treatments, and that was one of the treatments. And now I'm doing great. I still have to take the medicine every day and whatnot, but most people don't even know that I have anything, that I'm sick at all.
Do you wake up during the night to take medicines? So you said every four
Yep,
hours.
yep. Usually I do, and if I don't, I wake up real weak.
Mm.
And then it takes me about 2 hours to kind of get my body going again.
Yeah. Is
So,
this a genetic disease?
they say it's not. However, I have a cousin with myasthenia. My mom has it, and so does my oldest daughter. And so, even though they say it's not genetic, I don't know if they really know the genetic
Yeah.
makeup of this. So, yes, I say it is because, obviously in my family it is. But, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of one of those things that over time, people will learn more about it. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
like autism. I've talked to a number of people on this podcast who felt when they were growing up that they were different or something
Hmm.
wasn't right, and when they were adults, they were diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And
Interesting.
uh,
Yeah.
I subscribe to the theory that one of the biggest increases in autism has come about because we're learning more about it and we measure it more and we measure it
Absolutely.
more accurately.
Right. Yeah,
So
and I think that myasthenia gravis has become a lot more well known, and it's becoming a little bit easier to be diagnosed. I mean,
yeah,
like I said, it took them 18 months to diagnose me, but that was back in 1999. And I'm hearing, I'm on a lot of different platforms with other patients with myasthenia gravis, and some it takes them a long time to get diagnosed, but oftentimes the doctors are more familiar with it now, and people are getting diagnosed a little bit quicker. Thank goodness.
yeah. Well,
I was in respiratory failure before they figured out what was wrong with me.
and those are
So
the kinds of things that will come along and hopefully help people be more accurate in diagnosis in the future, as well as playing out and out figuring out what it is. And people hopefully over time will spend more of their efforts learning how to actually cure it. But that's of course another
absolutely.
story.
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of new treatments available. I haven't tried anything else only because what I've got is working, so why mess with it, right? But I was in a documentary. Actually, we filmed during COVID for this documentary. It's called A Mystery to Me, and it's all about myasthenia gravis.
Hmm.
And it was a company that did the documentary is a company that it now has other treatments available, which is fantastic. So,
Yeah, and once people start paying attention to these kinds of things, those are the very concepts that help more and more people truly understand it, which is great.
absolutely.
Well,
Yep.
so since you became ill with this, what have you learned?
Oh, I have learned so much. It's amazing. You know, I wouldn't wish illness on anybody.
Sure.
However, because I got sick, I have learned to take one day at a time. I've learned to appreciate things a lot more than I ever used to. When I got sick, I was working, like 60 hours a week, so stressed about, being the best at everything and doing everything. I was definitely a workaholic. And one thing that I've learned over the years, especially after I got sick, was to just take one day at a time, do the best I can do every single day, and try to make the most of every day that I have. You never know when life is going to change.
Right.
Hmm.
And you don't know how it's going to change.
Absolutely. And I've also learned to flip the script a lot. If something is negative, I try to flip it and turn it into a positive and try to learn from every setback and, look at it differently. Like instead of, oh, this is awful. This is happening to me. This is terrible. I try to flip it and say, why is this happening to me? What am I supposed to learn from this?
Hmm.
And becoming more positive and more mindful.
So what kind of answers have you gotten turning myasthenia gravis into a positive?
Um, well, I mean, just learning to take every day at a time,
Yeah.
one day at a time. I mean, some days I wake up and I feel fantastic and I can do everything that's on my to-do list for the day. And other days wake up and I don't feel so great. And so I just kind of have to do what is necessary and prioritize a little bit more. So, yeah, I have a running to-do list all the time. It's on my phone, and some things get checked off and some things don't. And what doesn't happen today will happen tomorrow or next week or whenever it gets done.
It does help you put a lot of things in perspective, doesn't it?
It sure does.
And there's a lot of value in that. And, some of these things you just didn't have any control over happening, but you certainly do have control over how you decide to deal with it.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
That kind of makes a lot of sense. Well, so you owned this performing arts studio for 35 years. Tell me more about that. What does that entail? What did you learn from doing that? It must have been obviously a school that grew, and you had to learn a lot to go along with it. But tell me about all that.
Well, I started out with just myself teaching, and then it grew and grew and grew. And at one point, I had 9 full-time teachers and 700 students, and decided that that was more than I liked. I didn't enjoy that so much because that put me out of the classroom and more in an administrative role. And I really missed teaching.
Mm,
So we slowly kind of actually downsized the school. Rather, you always hear about businesses trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, we got too big too fast. And so over time, we downsized the school a bit. And I got back into the classroom, which is where I so much, much appreciated being in the
right.
classroom. I love teaching. And I just felt like when I was in the office all the time, I wasn't making a big enough difference in the lives of the people that I was working with. And I mean, my purpose is in life is to make the world a better place. And I felt like I was just, you know, maneuvering people where they needed to be, but I wasn't actually making that big of a difference when I had such a big school. So, anyway, we taught ballet, jazz, tap, lyrical, musical theater, voice lessons, everything was within our school. And I decided about 250, 300 students was about where I really, that was the right number for us. So it worked out great.
Well, how many people did you have in a class typically at a time?
Usually, well, it depends on the class.
I
If it
guess
was,
that's true.
if it was a musical theater class, it might be 25 kids. If it was a ballet class with 3 and 4 year olds, it might be 8 kids. So it just kind of all depends. We also offered private lessons, and it just all depended upon the age group and the type of class being taught.
Yeah. Well,
Hmm.
that makes sense. But I hear exactly what you're saying. I really love to teach. And when I was in college at UC Irvine, my desire was to graduate, get advanced degrees, and then go into teaching. Well, that changed, and I didn't get to do that directly. But
Hmm.
over time, for me, um, I ended up getting back into teaching in a sense because after September 11th, now I do a lot of teaching about not only disabilities, but about leadership and trust. And I realize that, in fact, we're all teachers and we all can take advantage of being able to be teachers to help other people. One of the things that I always told every salesperson that I ever hired was be a student for a year, ask questions. You'll learn a lot more that way, and your customers want you to succeed. Your customers are generally not jerks, and they want you to succeed.
True.
So give them the opportunity.
Well, and everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And it's important that we all share our story. You never know, your story might be somebody else's, safety net. You might help them figure out their solution to their own life just by sharing your story. So I think it's very important that we, get back to the basics and start, talking to people and sharing our stories and helping each other out.
Well, and I believe and well, I believe absolutely that's what the whole purpose of Unstoppable Mindset is all about. This podcast is all about giving people the opportunity to tell their stories because, in fact, I think everyone has a story or stories to tell. And some of those stories are going to be about challenges they faced, and maybe nobody else has faced them, but they did. And so it's important to tell those stories to help them, but also because we're showing anyone who is involved in observing this podcast that they're more unstoppable than they think they are. And I think we really way too much undersell um, what we can do and what we should be doing. So I'm really glad to
Absolutely.
have that possibility and opportunity here.
Well, and I don't know how many times my doctors told me over the years to quit my job and go on disability because it was just too much and I wasn't physically going to be able to do it. And, I didn't do that. And I'm so glad I didn't do that. I just kept going.
Yeah.
And hopefully that experience taught my own children, for one, but also my students and their families. Hopefully it taught them, endurance
Yeah.
and the importance of, the show must go on. You just keep going.
So
So,
when you had the studio and so on, um, people were aware that you had myasthenia gravis?
yes, there were several years that I was very sick. I would
Yeah.
come in when I was well, and otherwise I would have to, when I was well enough. Otherwise, I would have to rely on my employees.
Yeah. So they were
But I
aware
just
of
kept
it.
running. Oh, yeah, everybody was very aware of it.
And the point is though that is why by any definition you were able to teach them about endurance and resilience.
Yes, there were several years there that I didn't know if I was going to make it.
Yeah.
So, but we kept on going. I didn't close the doors. So,
You made the choice.
yes. Well, and over the 35 years, we had a fire in the building, which wiped us out. We had to go to a temporary facility while they fixed the fire. And then we also a dam broke above where the studio was, and it completely flooded the
Ugh.
whole shopping center where the studio was. And we had like 6 inches of mud throughout the entire studio. So we had to go to a temporary facility for that. And then, of course, we got robbed at one point. They broke in and broke all the windows and like ransacked the office and stuff. Luckily, we didn't lose a whole lot there other than the windows and, sense of security.
Yeah.
But nobody was hurt, so that was good. It happened in the middle of the night, and then of course COVID, which shut us all down for a while, and we had to go. We shut down on a Friday, and Monday morning we opened virtual, and I didn't even know that that was a thing at the time. To be honest with you, I'd never done anything virtually, and look at me now. I mean, that's pretty much all I do is virtual teaching, which, you know, everything happens for a reason, and I'm not thrilled that COVID happened. However, it did teach me a lot about what is possible.
When did you
So,
actually close the studio?
well,
Or when did you switch ownership?
we switched in July of 2021
Oh, okay.
when my daughter took over and turned it into her own school. Her school is called Amplified Arts. Our school together was Spotlight Performing Arts Center. And then she bought the school. It's all hers, and hers is now Amplified Arts. And then I run my company, which is now called Spotlight Performers,
Mm-hmm.
which, like I said, I do coaching for children, in the performing arts, vocal, acting, and dance. And then I work as a performance and empowerment coach for professional entertainers.
Any professional entertainers we would have heard of?
I can't really tell that information because of confidentiality,
Yeah, I got it.
but I do work with my own daughter.
Oh,
I
that.
can tell you that. Her name is
Well,
Amber McKenzie, and she's pretty amazing.
let me
So,
rephrase the question just for fun. Any performers that we would have heard of, not mentioning names, but have you worked with some other besides you famous people?
yes,
Okay. Well,
but
there
I
you
can't
go.
tell you who.
No, that's okay. No, 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 no.
So, yeah, I'm very confidential with my students only because,
As you should be.
they're in the public eye. So,
Yeah. Well, no, no, that's fine. But it's neat that you're well recognized and you get to continue to do that sort of thing, which is really pretty cool. Tell me more about how you do this virtually, because I took dance when I was growing up, although I've forgotten a lot of the steps and so on, but I remember some of what I did. But still, I appreciate the whole concept of virtual. But how do you do that?
Well, we have a little area set up in our home that that I teach. But when during COVID, we actually turned the entire master bedroom of my house into a dance studio and we moved the bars and we moved, everything. We ripped out the carpet and put in the dance floors and did
Mm,
all of that, and just teach like a normal class.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mostly
so,
now for dance, I just do private lessons at this point. So,
yeah.
it's a lot easier, space wise to only do one-on-one. But it worked out during COVID as well. So,
So when you're teaching dance, how many cameras do you have that you have running in the virtual environment like that?
usually just the one.
Really? And
Yeah.
it can show everything from footwork to whatever else you need.
Yep.
Cool.
Well, and we adjust the distance from the camera based on what it is that needs to be observed
Right.
as well. So, yeah.
I have done some speaking virtually. I can do it. I don't like virtual for me as well as performing live,
No,
and
yeah,
mainly,
agreed.
yeah. Well, for me especially, I don't get any feedback from the audience. So when I'm
Right.
speaking and I'm in front of an audience there, when I'm speaking, I know what to expect, or I know what kind of reactions, having done this for 23 and a half years, I know what kind of reactions I should be getting based on whatever I'm saying. But I don't get that same
Right.
information in a virtual environment. So it's a little bit more of a challenge. But I've done it long enough that I know I can do it virtually if I need to.
Well, and it's kind of hard to read the room
Yeah,
when you're in a virtual setting. You can't hear
exactly
them. You
right.
can't, I can't see them, as much. So it's kind of hard to read the room as well. You don't get the feedback from the audience as much in a virtual setting. But I do also motivational speaking events, and I do love having an audience.
Yeah. One of the things that fascinated me during COVID was how different groups put on virtual concerts, and they were able
Yes.
to figure out how to time it so that it sounded just as natural as if they were all there together. That's got to be a challenge.
Well, it is a challenge. I do a lot of voice lessons, like singing lessons with my students on Zoom. And there's a setting on Zoom that you have to switch to be original sound for
Right.
musicians. If you don't switch that, then the sound is kind of funny. And there is a little bit of a time delay. So it is harder to do things as a group, and for like music concerts and stuff like that, because there is a time delay and everybody's internet is a little bit different with
Yeah.
speed. And so, yeah, it is a challenge. Luckily, most of what I do with the music is one-on-one. And
Yeah.
so it makes it much easier. They play their music from their home or, their office or wherever they are. So, there's no time delay with the music and their voice. It's the same. But when I'm playing the piano and they're singing to the piano, I just have to go slower because then I realize that there is a little bit of a time delay.
Or
But
once they start singing, you can then customize your playing to that.
absolutely.
But it is a
Uh-huh.
lot easier with one. It seems to me that I recall news broadcasts during COVID where whole philharmonic orchestras figured out ways to perform
They
virtually, which
did.
was cool.
Yeah, you have to figure it all out. When we were doing virtual learning and we were doing classes, we were doing entire musicals virtually.
Mm,
And we performed several musicals with our classes completely virtual. And it was definitely different.
yeah.
But we made it work. The show must go on. We made it work.
What did you
So,
learn from that?
um, that we can do it.
There you
It was
go.
so cool to learn that we could do anything. We were scheduled, or I was scheduled to record this documentary, a mystery to me. And that was, before COVID hit. We were supposed to start filming in April, but we had been working on it for months and months and months prior to that. And then everything got shut down.
Yeah.
And so the production company sent out all of the cameras and the sound equipment and the lighting and everything to us, and computers and everything. They sent it all out to us. And my daughters helped the production company. We got everything set up in our home, and then somehow the production company was able to take over the computers and run everything virtually. It was the
Yeah.
first time it had ever happened. And because of it, they won lots of awards for this documentary
I'll
because we
bet.
still filmed it, that we still did it. And it was really super fun and educational for all of us. That's when my daughter really decided she had to come to LA. That was it. She really had the bug then. She really wanted to come to LA when she was 7. And I told her, I'm a single mom. I've got a chronic illness. I'm running a business. I can't take you to LA when you're 7. If you still want to do it when you graduate from high school, then I'll take you to LA at that point. So she worked her tail off and graduated when she was 16 so that we could go to LA. But it was filming that documentary that she was determined. That was the end of it. She knew that was where she was going. So,
Well, and I understand conceptually and probably even a little bit more technically how the documentary company was able to take control over the computers and so on. But the neat thing about that from their standpoint is because they were able to control the computers, they were also able to help deal with the timing for what you were doing as well, which is pretty
yes,
cool.
it was amazing that it happened.
Yeah.
I was just so pleased with how it all was put together. They did a great job, and it turned into a very nice piece. So,
That's great. That is really exciting. Well, so you you eventually left the performing arts school, but why did
mhm.
you decide to become a performance and empowerment coach?
Well, I started writing books in 2010, and my goal was to always become a motivational speaker and to
Ah,
share my story and to empower people. But I had, a little kid. At the time, my youngest was 6. My 2 older kids were older. They're 10 and 14 years older than my youngest. And because I got sick between my second and my third child and couldn't have kids for a while because I was so sick. But anyway, I decided that in 2010, I really wanted to share my story and become a motivational speaker. And that kind of empowered me to become more of an empowerment coach. I mean, that was kind of what I wanted to do all along. And when I came to LA, I didn't want to run a big school anymore. It was time for me to retire from that and, teach virtually one-on-one students or clients. But I also wanted to help entertainers. I wanted to work with, there's a lot of entertainers that they get really frustrated with themselves or they get really down
mm,
on themselves. You hear about kids that, were child actors and then they got into drugs or they got into, a different direction where it wasn't healthy. And so I really wanted to use, my experience of working with kids over the years. I mean, I've worked with thousands of kids over the years, and they've all had their own set of problems and abilities, I should say. Not certainly not all problems, but we've overcome a lot, and I wanted to be able to share that and be able to share that knowledge with the people that really needed it the most. And so, yeah, that's why I became a performance coach and an empowerment coach. I not only work with performers, but I also work with patients, different types of chronic illnesses. One of my keynotes is The Show Must Go On, and it's patient empowerment.
mm,
And that would be the empowerment coaching. The Step into Your Spotlight keynote that I do, it's called Create the Life You Want to Live. That's more for performance, coaching. That's more for singers, dancers, actors, performers, so that they can follow their dreams. But then I also do for just everybody, Flip the Script, which again we talked about how overcoming obstacles, just figuring out how to turn the negative to the positive. So that's another one of the speeches that I give. And also, we live in a kind of a crazy world right now, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that we all work to, be the change that needs to happen in the world. So that's something that I also talk to, different groups about, not only groups of like women's conferences and stuff, but also children, teaching kids dare to be different. They don't have to follow the crowd, and adults don't have to follow the crowd. We can be the change. So, empowerment coaching it goes hand in hand with performance coaching. When I'm working with entertainers, I have to empower them a lot to overcome the obstacles that they have. It might be imposter syndrome, it might be anxiety, or, believe it or not, even superstars have performance anxiety or they get
Hmm.
stage fright. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of empowerment coaching that goes along with the performance coaching.
And it's so unfortunate that in our world we don't really see enough where children are taught to have the confidence that they should have or that they can have. Um, we don't really, as much as we should, encourage people to think about the impossible and how to make it possible, or as I like to say it, um, what's wrong with saying why not? And going from there. We just don't teach
Right.
that. We don't teach curiosity nearly as much as we should.
That is true. And we got to remember that the kids are, these little kids that are growing up now are our future leaders of tomorrow. It's very important that we teach them how to handle these things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we should be teaching people to be more curious. Um, I keep hearing all the time about helicopter parents and so on, and they just really smother their kids so much, and the kids never get a chance to really explore, which is unfortunate because that's the time to really explore is when you're a kid.
This is true.
I do appreciate that there are a lot of other scary things that go on in the world, but you can still allow your child to be curious and explore without stifling all that creativity and saying, well, you can't go outside because somebody might shoot you or something like that.
Right. Well, and you can keep your children safe, but also keep them involved.
Hmm.
You just have to be very aware of what your children are doing and, and put them in activities that they're going to gain the confidence that they need and the skills that they need to be successful.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah,
remember when I was growing up, and the doctors, when it was discovered I was blind, told my parents to send me off to a home because no blind child could ever grow up to do anything. And my parents said, "You guys are wrong. Of course he can." And my father at the
right. Look
time,
at you now.
yeah, scary. I'm still trying to figure out what to do. Um,
Aren't we
so,
all, right?
yeah, well, there is that. My
What do we
father,
want to be when we grow up?
yeah, yeah, I'll never grow up, as Mary Martin said in Peter Pan. Um,
True.
but my father owned in Chicago a television repair shop. Of course, you don't have those sorts of things anymore. If a TV dies, you just go get a new one. But back then, you replace tubes, you replace
Hmm.
resistors and capacitors and so on. And occasionally he took me on calls with him
Hmm.
and he said, now don't put your hand inside the TV because it's plugged in, right? And you get shocked. Well,
Right.
I don't remember the circumstances. I don't know that I deliberately stuck my hand in the TV to see what would happen, but I did touch a TV in the wrong spot and I did get a shock. And my dad saw it and he said, see what happens? But as I recall, I wasn't trying to stick my hand in the TV. I was just trying to put my hand somewhere and just ended up in the TV. But I did learn what electricity felt like, which was a cool thing.
Quite a shock. Yeah.
Quite a shock. I can't say whether that really led me to decide that I wanted to get a master's degree in physics, but still, it was a lot of fun,
Right.
and it
And
did give
it's
me a
important that
yeah,
we teach kids, that when they make a mistake that they learn from it and they move on and that mistakes are part of learning.
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, and I always tell my vocal students, for example, if you don't squeak, you're not working hard enough.
Yeah,
You got to get to a point where you squeak sometimes, or that
Yeah.
you hit a wrong note, or, whatever. If you always stay in a safety zone, you're not going to learn from it.
You got to
So,
stretch and grow.
well, and there's certain safe places to stretch and grow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Which
Absolutely.
make perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, so as what's the difference between a performance coach and an empowerment coach?
Well, a performance coach is a skills coach. So I teach kids or clients, not just kids, adults as well, to sing, to dance, to act, to perform. Okay. We work on the skills. Also, we work on their career. So there's, resume writing, there's headshot development, there's different profiles that you have to have. There's a lot with it career wise that's not just skills, but in order to be an entertainer, there's certain things that you have to have career wise. And then the last part of it is empowerment coaching. So performance coaching is a combination of all three. Empowerment coaching, on the other hand, is kind of something within itself. It's the motivational speaking.
Hmm.
It's empowering people to, overcome obstacles, to set goals, to like create the lives that they want to live, to dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And that makes sense because that's what really empowerment is all about. And I think all too many of us could use a lot more empowerment coaching because we underrate ourselves, which is, of course, what I said earlier, talking about unstoppable mindset. We underrate ourselves. We don't think we're nearly as unstoppable as we really are because we sell ourselves short.
Right. Well, and people think that to be a positive person, that you have to be positive all the time. But
Hmm.
even positive people are not positive all the time. They have bad days.
Yeah.
They have days where they have a lot of anxiety. They may have days where they really start to doubt themselves. It doesn't mean that, you're not a positive person if you doubt yourself. It just means that, being positive or being healthy is a journey. It's not a destination. Life is a journey.
But
And there's highs and lows of everyday life for everybody.
the idea, though, is that if you're a positive person, you are able to get to the point when you're not feeling positive, you recognize that and you work to overcome that,
Yes,
which is what a lot of people have to learn to do, which they haven't learned to do, but it would make sense if more people would focus on, all right, this happened. Why did it happen? What can I do about it? How do I learn from it? And that's the thing we don't teach ourselves nearly as much as we should about introspection and self-analysis.
absolutely. Well, and I call it flip the script
Yeah,
because
right.
you know, things are going to happen. Life happens, and it's just a matter of how you deal with it. For example, the other night I was picking my daughter up from work, and we noticed that we had a nail in our tire. And we were on our way home, and we noticed it was like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and we had a nail in the tire, and there was no way we were going to get home without having a flat tire. So
Hmm.
I turned around and we went over to Costco and we got the tire fixed. And rather than being all frustrated about it, we just went in. They said that they'd fix the tire, and we went to the snack bar and got some
I
ice
was going
cream
to say,
because you know
you went
what?
to the snack bar.
Ice cream fixes everything, right?
It
Ice cream or
does.
chocolate.
Yeah,
When all else fails, eat chocolate.
that's
Or,
right.
or chocolate ice cream. That's even better.
Sure. Then you have a double whammy that fixes
There you
everything.
go. I
Yeah.
know, right? So, it's just a matter of life happens, and not everything in life, even for positive people, is going to be positive. So, you just have to figure out how to make things be the best. I always say you have to find the joy. We go for walks every day, and I try to find smiley faces wherever I can, like with rocks and sticks. There's smiley faces. Sometimes you'll find them on the sidewalk or whatever. And if we can't find them, we make them.
Yeah.
I find leaves and sticks, and we make smiley faces for other people to find. And, you know, you just have to make your own fun and make your own happiness,
Well,
or just look for it.
and things come up, as you said. And the fact of the matter is that you can decide, how to deal with it. You didn't apparently have any control over that nail getting into that tire, but you had absolute control over how you decided to deal with it. And that
Right.
happens all the time. And we do have control over how we decide to deal with whatever comes along in life. But I agree, chocolate ice cream is the number one fix.
Right. Well, and everything happens for a reason. Maybe we just needed chocolate ice cream that
That's
night.
right. But you
You
never
know?
know what else might happen. You never know who you might meet,
Right.
or what else might happen. So it's life is an adventure, and if we don't treat it as an adventure, what good are we?
Absolutely. I agree.
So, as a motivational speaker, who is your audience?
Well, I work with a lot of women's groups, a lot of retirement communities will bring me in to empower their residents, Girl Scout troops,
Ah,
schools, universities. You know, it just kind of depends on which message that I'm giving at the time. I also work with businesses. And at different conventions and luncheons. Just kind of depends.
and do you charge for speaking?
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Girl Scout troops probably don't have nearly as much to pay, but that's okay.
Well, and it just kind of depends on the organization that I'm working with and the
Yeah,
time involved and the distance, and there's a lot of factors in it.
I agree. And that's what I find as well. There are some places that don't pay. Rotary clubs typically don't pay for speakers, but you never
Right.
know what else you might get out of it. So that's okay.
Absolutely. And you know what? You get out of every job that I ever do, every event, I always learn as much as I give.
Yeah.
Or I meet somebody amazing,
Well, and
you
and
know?
my belief actually goes a little bit further. If I don't learn at least as much as anyone else, I'm not doing my job right.
Absolutely.
And
I
I think that
agree.
is so true. So
Mhm.
what made you decide to start public speaking?
Like I said, in 2010, I wrote my first book because I wanted to share my story. So
Okay.
I started public speaking way back then.
Wow.
And I love
That's
to teach, so
they go together, don't
they
they?
go together. Yeah.
Well, tell us about the books that you've published. You've done what, 8 books now?
I've done 8 books. I actually have 3 of them right here. Unfortunately, I'm out of stock of the last one, but here's one. They're all my story. This one is called The Show Must Go On, and that was the first one that I published, and that one really is more my myasthenia gravis story.
Mm.
And then the second one is called From One Stage to the Next, and that one is just kind of a continuation of that, of my myasthenia gravis story and kind of what the next step was. The script of life here, there's kind of a glare, sorry about that. The script of life is what I've learned, over the years behind the scenes. It says here, director's notes, the script of life, things I have learned behind the scenes, but it's all part of the overcoming obstacles through positive thinking. And then the last one that I did, uh, it's called Life is Not a Dress Rehearsal, and which is again just the things that I have learned. They're part of some of the lessons that I've learned, which is all kind of part of my podcast as well.
Now, do you self-publish or do you have a publisher?
Right now, I'm self-publishing, but I'm actually looking for a literary agent so that we can go in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I asked because you said you were out of some of your books, so I was just kind of
yeah,
curious
I'm
if you,
actually
yeah.
out of the new one, the Life is Not a Dress Rehearsal book. I'm out of that one right now. Then I also have 2 goal-setting workbooks, one for adults and one for children. And then I have one book that's it's called My Daily Pep Talk, which is just a bunch of positive sayings and quotes. So whenever I'm having a bad day, I actually use mine. I just open it to a page, and that's my positive thought for the day. And then using my performing arts background, I wrote a handbook for dancers and dance teachers and parents. And that one is actually going worldwide. Studios are buying that one to use it for teaching. And it's my curriculum.
Well, if you can't practice what you preach, what good are you?
Right?
So, yeah, I mean, it's talk is cheap, but it's a lot harder to talk and then actually follow through and support what you teach. But that's what really people look for. And I'm of the opinion that in reality, people know when you're blowing smoke and when you're really serious. And when you're serious, you do practice what you preach, and that's the way it ought to be.
That is right. I agree.
Yeah. So tell me about your podcast. It's called Overcoming Obstacles Through Positive Thinking, which is what you also mentioned about one of your books. But tell me about the podcast a little bit.
Well, it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's on YouTube, and we'll put a link to the YouTube
Yeah.
podcast as well. Basically, I just take a topic and then I just talk about it, and they're very short. I did that on purpose so that people can listen, on their way to work. They're like 5 to 10 minutes long each, so that they can quickly listen and hopefully be empowered through the day by listening to the different topics. Yeah, I've got 50 episodes, I guess, right now on the podcast. Um, and hopefully I can inspire somebody through that.
We've done Unstoppable Mindset typically for an hour, but of course it is a conversation, which is a little bit different than what you do.
Right.
But it seems to be going pretty well. People like it, and we're continuing to publish it, and no one has come and said don't do it anymore. So we're having a lot of fun with it.
I've listened to quite a few of yours, and you do a great job. I'm
It's
glad that
fun.
you do it. Yeah, it's
Well,
fun, and it's very positive.
it all started out doing radio at KUCI at UC Irvine when I played old radio shows for almost 7 years. I collect old shows, and so we would play them and talk between them and so on. So I learned a lot about radio doing that, and so that helped in getting the podcast started as well. When I was asked to do one, it just seemed like the right thing to do.
I think it's a really good way to educate the public. I have another podcast that I do with the Performers with Purpose Foundation, which is my nonprofit that we started back in 2018. And with that one, we do more interviews like this. So, and it's to bring education to people that want to go into the entertainment industry. We have different artists on. People that have been in Broadway shows, people who are music artists, actors, singers, dancers, performers, agents, managers, that kind of thing. And then we do like a conversation like what you're doing here, which is fun.
I am of the opinion there is nothing in the world like seeing a live show. Of course, I've had the opportunity to see several on Broadway, but also elsewhere, and there's just nothing like doing that. It's so powerful.
It is very powerful.
My favorite one still, from a powerful standpoint, is I'm trying to remember exactly when it was. It had to be in 1979, I think. No, it was earlier than that. It was 1977, I think, or early 78. Anyway, I was invited to go with a friend to a Broadway show. It was a Shakespeare play, Othello, and the two stars, I cannot remember who played Desdemona, but James Earl Jones played Othello and Christopher Plummer played Iago. What a show.
Oh, that's fabulous. What a show.
It was as powerful as I have ever seen. It was amazing. And you
I
know
love
what's
it.
going to happen at the end, but even so, when people are falling on their swords, the whole audience would go, I mean, it was like they didn't even see it coming. Well, of course they knew. I mean, it's not like Othello was
Mhm.
brand new, but that's how powerful
Right.
it was. It was great. I love
That's awesome.
live theater. Never have had,
It's cool that live shows can really do that to you,
yeah,
right? Bring
yeah.
so much emotion.
And that's part of what you teach,
Absolutely.
which is so cool.
If you can make them laugh or you can make them cry, you've done your job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they can go out and if they remember it, so much the better. So
Well, they'll
you,
remember it more if you make them laugh or make them cry, right?
right. Absolutely.
Right.
So you have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. That's a
I
growing
do.
brood,
I'm
isn't it?
so blessed with that. Yeah. My oldest just turned 35 a few days ago. And then I have a son who's 31, and I have a daughter who's 21. And then I have 4 grandsons and one little grandbaby girl.
Wow. Well, you have more males overall. Well, except you got 2 daughters and 1 son, but still more males
Right.
than females. Well, that's okay.
Yeah. More male grandbabies.
Yeah. And more coming.
Well, not from my 2 oldest. I think they're both done, but my
Your little
youngest,
girl.
she's not little anymore. She's 21. My
Yeah.
youngest will eventually have children, and then I get to enjoy it all over again.
There
So,
you go. It's
yeah.
part of what makes it fun. And and grandmama will get them all into performing arts.
Well, I'm called Grammy because it's kind of like the music award, only
There you
better.
are. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
that'll be fun.
And, I don't know if they will all be actors, singers, dancers, performers, or just whatever wonderful thing they come up with. I think my oldest grandson's probably going to be a scientist.
Mm,
And I think, I'm not really sure about the others, maybe comedians. They're all pretty funny. So we'll see.
nothing like having a lot of laughter around, is there?
They bring so much joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about your nonprofit, your foundation.
It's called the Performers with Purpose Foundation. And we started it, well, um, 34 years ago, I guess. Okay, well, 35 years ago, I had my daughter. And then shortly after she was born, when she was 10 days old, I left my abusive husband and we ended up getting a divorce. And that first Christmas was really, really, really hard for me because I was
Mm,
a single mom, didn't have any money. I had, a brand new baby that was a couple months old, and it just broke my heart because I wanted to give her the world, but I couldn't give her the world because I was a single broke mom. And decided at that point that I was never going to be in that position again,
mm,
and started doing a program called Sub for Santa the following year. So when she was a year old, started providing Christmas. I owned a performing arts school at that point still, and started doing performances around Christmas time to raise money to provide for other families who needed help. And so, hence, Performers with Purpose. We did performances to, provide Christmas for these families. And that started 34 years ago. And so, and we've done it ever since. So all of my kids grew up knowing Sub for Santa. That's what we did for Christmas every year. But in 2018, we decided to go ahead and form a nonprofit organization called the Performers with Purpose Foundation
there you go.
and get our 501c3 status so that we could be tax exempt and do it right, do it on a bigger scale, I guess. And so now we raise money year round by doing performances, and the money goes to provide Christmas for underprivileged children that need
Cool.
it. So
Cool.
last year, I think we donated like 2,500 gifts for children. Both my daughter in Colorado works her program, and then we work a program here in California as well. So we have 2 different divisions that we provide, you know, toys, gifts, clothing, and necessities to the families that need them.
So if you had one thing you wanted to say to everyone that they should remember or take away from today, what would it be?
Let's see. Maybe work to find your purpose and try to make the world a better place
There you go.
by whatever that purpose is.
What's your purpose?
Um, to teach everything that I have been so lucky to learn.
And that
And
is as profound as it gets.
yeah,
Well, if people
don't
want to
keep
reach,
anything to yourself.
Yeah, yeah, share. Well, if
Share.
people want to reach out to you and so on, how do they do that?
My website is performers with, I'm sorry, spotlightperformers.com, or you can reach out to performerswithpurposefoundation.com.
And we'll have everything in show notes as well, but it's always good to ask and get that. Well, I want to thank you for being here today. This has been a lot of fun. I'm glad that we had the opportunity to do this and to, I think, provide a lot of information. I learned a lot. I appreciate it. And I hope other people who are out there monitoring us also learned a lot. Um, if you liked our podcast wherever you are, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening or YouTubing us or whatever. But we would appreciate your rating. We love 5-star ratings, especially, of course. And also, if you'd like to reach out to me, it's easy. It's michaelhi@accessibe.com. That's MICHAELHI at accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. And for all of you out there, including you, Teresa, if you know anyone who you think ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, I'd love to get an introduction because we always want to have more people on and be inspired and learn a lot more. And as I said earlier, and I'll say again, if I'm not learning at least as much as anyone else, I'm not doing my job. And so I need the opportunity to learn. So bring on the learning experiences. It's a lot of fun. But again, Teresa, I want to thank you for being here. This has been cool.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.